Story 1. Magical Rubber Duck. It slowly turns any body of water it is in into the perfect bath, warm and bubbly. I threw it into a piranha pit. About 20 minutes later, the piranhas were all dead from soap poisoning. Floaty rock. A rock that gains or loses buoyancy based on its temperature. As a warlock with the prestidigitation spell and a rope, I could use it to hover and float very slowly. I had no way to steer, but it was useful when stuck in a pit or on a high ledge. Rat flute. A flute that summons a horde of rats like the Pied Piper and can also be used to control any rat-like creature, including a criminal known as the Rat because he is a snitch. I had a lot of fun with that. Story 2. I gave my players a rock of gravity detection, which is exactly what it sounds like. They got it early in the campaign, and when dropped it would accelerate until it reached terminal velocity toward the nearest center of gravity. So basically it acted like a normal rock. Much later in the campaign, they found themselves floating aimlessly through the astral plane, searching for another player's soul trapped in a keep on a small chunk of land that had been transported to the astral plane. They had little to go on. They were essentially floating in a void. Then one of my players pulled out the rock of gravity detection. I tried to argue that it was just a rock and would float there, but because of my wording they argued it should accelerate toward the nearest center of gravity. They found the keep. Story 3. A wand of lesser summoning. It only summons local creatures in celestial form. They chose fish, summoning trout in stacks to trigger traps and similar effects. Need to slow a pursuer? Send many fish. Need a distraction? Throw fish. I told them it could summon any local creature, but on every character sheet the item was listed as fish gun. Story 4. I gave my players an amulet that lets them speak to rocks. The player who picked it up spent most of that session talking to his new pet rock and often interrogated rocks they found at scenes for information, usually getting either vague answers or things they could already see, because it is a rock. Later, another party member wanted to try talking to a different rock. Actually, a pile of stones made into a crude gravestone tied to that character's backstory. Only then did the first player discover the amulet was cursed and could not remove it. They later had the curse lifted and the amulet identified. I revealed that the amulet only made them think they could speak to rocks, and all the information they had obtained from rocks was information they already knew. They then used the now uncursed amulet as a roleplay tool to ask me, in character, about details they had forgotten or needed clarified rather than asking out of character, which worked great. Story 5. I homebrewed the hat of many hats. It's a regular hat, but it's made of shift weave, so it can have the appearance of any other hat. It was part of a shop selling dodgy knockoffs of regular magical items, in this case the Hat of Disguise. The halfling who always struggled with role-playing took it, and it became a great way to get her more involved in what her character would do. It started when she transmuted an "I'm with stupid baseball cap" to tease one of the other party members after he'd come up with a nonsense plan. One of the other players asked what this mysterious baseball was, and she ran with it, saying it was a game they used to play back in her home region when they were kids. All of a sudden she had a backstory, rather than just being, "I'm short and I stab things." I'm sure she would have come into role-playing eventually, but it was like giving her a dressing-up box and seeing her realize that she could actually do things that weren't just purely mechanical. Story 6. I am a player, not a dungeon master. I was given an artifact that only cast quicksand. It turned a certain volume of rock temporarily into quicksand. The campaign had high-level characters. It was a bit of a gag gift, and my halfling received it. A small army of orcs was approaching us across a narrow bridge. The dungeon master expected a massive fight that would test our hit points and deplete our magic items. The central portion of the stone bridge turned into quicksand and dropped into the gulf below, completely cutting off the orcs. We strolled off at leisure, also known as how to get the dungeon master to blink in silent confusion for 3 minutes as his game ended hours early. Story 7. Tweezers for bottling boats. You have gained the ability to put ships into bottles with these tweezers. Thieves were sneaking into dockyards at night and stealing entire fleets. When the Navy finally caught on, the thieves would sail away and toss the shrunken boats in bottles at the Navy boats following them, causing the Navy boats to rapidly expand. Then they began planning nested bottling, placing bottled boats on full-sized boats and then bottling those boats repeatedly. This effectively created a dozen boats that would rapidly expand in one town when a single bottle was thrown. I had to shut that down quickly. Story 8. In our very first session, the fighter really wanted to steal from the quest giver's house, so I gave her an ornamental dagger that was essentially useless except as something to sell. 10 sessions later, they used it as a gift to bribe their way into a royal wedding. Story 9. Bagpipes of invisibility grant invisibility while they are played. Silence is one hell of a spell. Story 10. I gave the party a tiny bag of holding made of human skin. I do not remember why. They were trapped in a house fighting a zombie horde. They turned the skin bag into a Molotov-style bomb, enchanted it to fly over the zombies, and the zombies followed the human skin until it exploded. It took 45 minutes to reach that point, and it was easily the funniest and most creative moment I have seen from the Dungeon Master side. Story 11. We had a rock that, if it knocked you out, made you completely invulnerable while unconscious. You had to successfully hit yourself or someone else and take damage from being knocked unconscious by a rock to the skull. That rock caused chaos, death, and even life. It also caused permanent head trauma to the non-player characters we were trying to rescue. Story 12. A random encounter in the woods gave the players a crow mask that forces the wearer to call like a crow while wearing it. It is based on an item from Slay the Spire. The mask can be removed without issue, so it is a silly flavor item. The players, however, are convinced it is the secret MacGuffin of the campaign and keep trying to use it for everything. Most attempts fail, but a few times the stars align and it somehow works. They used it to calm a strange mutated child so they could ask questions and learn about an ambush. They used the enlarged spell, the mask, and a very high deception and performance skill check to convince a cult that the fighter was a stronger god than the one they were worshipping. They constantly use it to make every town guard think the party is too much trouble to bother. Story 13. A magic whistle that summons pigeons was given to the party. They used it to kill an orc commander by turning his armor into bread, having the pigeons eat it, and then striking him in the face with a bolt of lightning. Story 14. The healing rock deals 1d4 bludgeoning damage but restores 1d4 plus 1 hit points. It was intended as a humorous way to bring characters back from unconsciousness by restoring a small amount of hit points. Barbarians resist bludgeoning damage while raging, so the healing rock became a go-to strategy for keeping barbarians healed between fights. Story 15. I gave them a folding boat. Saying a magic word, the small shoebox expands into a boat. Not 5 minutes later, in real life, the rogue threw the box from the roof, said the magic word, and produced the only instance of 20 dice rolls I have ever had to make. I do not know whether this is allowed under rules as written or rules as intended, but damn it, throwing a boat at people is too much fun to forbid. Story 16. Maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I wanted an excuse to tell this story. I had a party of a wizard, ranger, druid, summoner, and barbarian in Pathfinder 1st edition. All the party members except the barbarian had some kind of pet. An animal companion, a familiar, or the druid's menagerie. A few sessions in, my barbarian sent me a text while the party was setting up camp. The barbarian volunteered to take a watch, and the next morning the rest of the party woke to his new pet, Brock de Rock, a stone with eyes and a mouth crudely carved into him. Brock went on adventures with the party and was mostly forgotten until a premature fight with the Ark's final boss. The boss defeated the party, leaving everyone unconscious except the barbarian, who had single-digit hit points. Not wanting a total party kill, and with the boss in surprisingly worse shape than I expected, I had the boss taunt the barbarian and begin to fly away. The barbarian declared that Brock was going to take the attack and threw his pet with all his might. Brock scored a critical hit, rolled maximum damage, and the boss dropped to -1 hit point and fell face-first at the barbarian's feet. Brock then performed the coup de grace to finish what he had started. And that is how our party's pet rock gained a temporary flight speed of 40 feet and a favored enemy of verbose sorcerers. Story 17. One time our dungeon master gave us a rod of summon boat as a joke. We rolled a natural 20 for the summon and got an entire galleon. The campaign quickly became pirate-themed as we became privateers. Story 18. We acquired a brick mold and some basic tools when we found a workshop in a dungeon. It was supposed to be just set dressing, but I took it anyway. Later we used it and several more we made from its design to reinforce a village that would soon come under attack. After everyone in the village made clay bricks for 2 weeks, we had enough to build a wall tall enough to protect one approach to the town, allowing us to concentrate the fighting at the other entrance where we could mass our forces. It saved many lives because we could not be flanked. Story 19. One of the players had married a pretty young non-player character who was not an adventurer. I gave him a ring of conjugal visits that would transport him to his wife for an hour, then return him to the adventuring group. The ring worked twice a week and was intended as a joke. When the party was beaten up after a hard combat, he used the ring and asked his wife where the nearest temple was, then bought healing potions from the local cleric. Soon this became routine: cure disease, healing, and similar spells. The ring became his quick trip to the pharmacy, and he always found time for a quick encounter with his wife. Eventually, he woke up the cleric at 3 a.m. to buy more potions. The cleric threw a fit and told him never to come back. The player went back anyway, and the next time there was a bouncer at the temple door telling him to get lost. Story 20. We used a jug of alchemy to waterboard someone with vinegar. It has also been used to make mayonnaise. Story 21. A gray bag that had stuck to rats was abused so much in one session that I created a huge rat god to attack the party. It was not that they were overusing the item, it was that they were using it poorly. At one point they pulled rats out and killed them to use their blood as dye. Story 22. The jar of endless lard was supposed to be a joke, but somehow they managed to set a forest on fire with a timed fuse. Coating various body parts in the lard to ignite them for extra damage was not good. Story 23. I gave my players a torch that could not be lit by normal means. After 2 or 3 sessions, one of them finally asked how to light it. I had forgotten about it, so I had an NPC say it could only be lit by an Elder Red Dragon's breath weapon, and once lit it would burn forever. Suddenly, the entire party of 3rd and 4th level player characters decided to veer off course to get the torch lit. Story 24. My party was camping in a barn and made friends with a goose. I allowed them to take the goose as a guard or emergency food. While dungeon crawling, they found a gold bracer. The cuff was a soulbound item that caused whoever wore it to be randomly possessed by a Lich King. They planned their next quest would be to remove it from the affected party member. After a thorough inspection, the party discovered an evil aura around the cuff. They put it on the goose. Their theory was that because the goose was chaotic neutral, it would balance the bracer's evil. Now they had a chaotic neutral guard goose that would be randomly possessed by a neutral evil lich, take on the appearance of a zombie goose, and cast random spells through a series of honks and hisses. Story 25. They received a vaguely sword-shaped branch of ash wood. That was it. This was in a planescape setting. A few hours later, the sorcerer persuaded an apologetic djinn that the adjectives were unordered. So the object was, in fact, a sword that was vaguely a branch of ash wood. To make amends for destroying part of the party's inventory, the djinn remade the sword according to the sorcerer's description while under a compulsion of truth. Thus was born Sylvanblade. Story 26. I gave my players a chalice that, when drunk from, caused the drinker to sweat fat profusely. They used it to overcome a cold-based trap in the dungeon, a hallway that became progressively colder. When they emerged on the other end, covered in fat, they entered the dungeon boss's chamber. The fight was slippery. Story 27. My favorite magic item that my players found was a completely homebrewed object with no practical function, but they still got creative with it. They found the Pie Stone. Holding the stone in your hand and concentrating fills a 25-foot radius centered on the stone with the smell of a pie of your choice. This effect lasts for 10 minutes or until you dismiss it. The rogue used it to sneak past guards and as a distraction tactic when scouting. Story 28. I'm not the dungeon master, but in the last campaign I played, the dungeon master gave us a regenerative oasis that only appears to people who need it. The party experimented by throwing bones into it and bringing the animals they belonged to back to life. One player threw the hat of the deceased king into the water, and a single hair revived the king. The dungeon master had not considered that possibility because the session was supposed to be our beach episode. Story 29. Not mine, but the question reminded me of a post by Nickelberg. I created a non-player character werewolf that was supposed to be a major villain in the campaign and stalk the players. It was a higher level than the player characters, so the idea was that they would need to flee every encounter and take measures to avoid being followed. Having someone on their tail constantly tracking them who could and would actually kill them was supposed to inject a sense of urgency into the game. On the first encounter, the werewolf was shown methodically slaying a large group of town guards and a high-ranking paladin. The characters were around level 5, and the non-player character was probably challenge rating of 12 and would scale as they leveled. They interrupted the combat, and the idea was that they would attempt to fight the werewolf, who did not consider them a threat initially and so would not just murder the whole party. They would see it killing a high-level character and think, "Oh shit, we need to run from it," while it slaughtered the rest of the guards. At first, they rushed in to help and attacked the werewolf, doing little damage because they did not have silver weapons, and I gave this particular non-player character a regeneration ability only stopped by silver. I had the werewolf attack one of the players with a secondary bite attack, which should have put them at fairly low health without killing them outright. That player paused for a moment, then asked if he could try to block the attack with his hand. I was not sure what he was getting at, but I let him try with a dexterity check with a difficulty class of 10, although it would not affect what kind of damage he took. He succeeded. He then asked if he could jam his hand into the werewolf's mouth. I said sure, but he was probably going to have it bitten off and would need a new hand. He said, "Even better." I described the werewolf doing so. The rest of combat continued until that player's turn, and he seemed undisturbed by the loss of a hand. On his turn, he said, "I activate Quail's Feather token to make a tree. This token is a magical one-time use item that creates a 5-foot diameter, 40-foot high tree. It's a handy utility item that our playgroup was fond of. Previously, we'd used it to do things from making bridges and crossing walls to providing a druid with a way to use a particular spell in plantless areas that require trees. It did not seem to have much use here. I asked him where on the board he was activating it. He pointed at the werewolf. I said the most it would do was knock the werewolf prone, and it would get a fairly easy saving throw to prevent that. He smiled and said, "No, it's in the werewolf." "What? How?" I was holding it when he ate my hand. The rest of the party and I were silent for a second. I tried to think of a valid reason why this would not work. I failed. The werewolf now had a 5-foot wide tree growing out of him. The fact that he had regeneration did not particularly help when little bits of him were plastered on walls 20 feet away. The entire party celebrated. They received a reward from the town and an ally in the paladin who had been presumed dead. I had to make a new non-player character. Clever players are awesome. Story 30. I gave my party a stick that endlessly dripped salt water. I did not expect them to have any use for it, but they decided to use it as a trap for a corrupt noble by wetting his marble floors at the top of the stairs. The noble ended up dead. Story 31. I gave them a carpet. They used it to kill 6 people. They laid it on people to smother and burn them. They used the enlarge and reduce spell to cover the victims. They killed guards without enlarging it. That was why I gave it to them, so they could strangle the guards. But when we reached the leader of the cultists, they realized they could cast enlarge and reduce twice, turning the already 20 feet by 20 feet carpet into an 80 feet by 80 feet one. At first they tried to crush and smother the leader, but I decided I should not allow that to work. So they set the carpet on fire, and I could not find a way to stop them. Moral of the story: wizards can make mundane items tools for mass murder. Story 32. My dungeon master gave me an eye. I'm a player. We had a non-player character stalking us during the travel portion of the campaign who would show up and do odd things like pull out his eye, show it to us, and then pop it back in. It was gross because he was undead. One time I used a pickpocket check to take it from him. He insisted that I give it back. We were in the temple of the god of trickery, which we both worshipped, so I put his eye in the collection plate. He could either take it out and suffer the consequences or lose the eye for good. That was a great moment. Story 33. I am not a dungeon master, but my friend is, and he told me about a sword he gave a party. He called it the normal sword. When his players asked if there was anything special about it, he always replied that it was just a normal sword. In practice, it was so normal that it negated all magic, but his party never figured that out. Story 34. I gave my players a pig whistle. Once a day they could blow it and summon a pig. I hadn't given the idea much thought, but they used it constantly. They sent pigs into spring traps, held impromptu luau's to curry favor with peasants, and never had to worry about rations again, pork for dinner. I thought it was just a useless throwaway item, but they proved me wrong. Good times. Story 35. I found a homebrew item called a used bag of holding. It covers everything you put in the bag with a thin layer of glitter. One of my players started scraping off the glitter and collecting it. Eventually, he had enough glitter to use the spell Animate Objects. That little rascal would have several of these bags fly around and dump their contents on people, causing great confusion as the glitter got in their eyes and hardly came off because it was sticky. I do not normally like to edit posts, but I want to encourage everyone interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons to give it a try. I started during quarantine and have enjoyed myself immensely. If you are looking for a place to start and do not have a group to play with in person, I recommend checking out the Dungeon Dudes on YouTube. While their guides are mostly meant for experienced players, they also run a Discord server with hundreds, if not thousands, of players. As long as you are willing to learn and open-minded, I do not see why you cannot start playing Dungeons and Dragons. Story 36. I ran a bit called the Bargain Bin where I improvised silly, made-up spells on the spot. My favorite was a bag of holding that held exactly as much as a bag of that volume should. I did not expect the players to get creative. They sewed more material onto it to make it bigger and then rolled it up. It remained cumbersome. I required extra turns to use it in combat, but it was a great laugh at how they undermined my nonsense. Because the bag weighed 15 pounds regardless of its contents, it remained a useful tool. Frost Sock. Everyone's feet became blocks of ice. They immediately rolled a natural 20 on a melee attack, so I ruled that enemies' feet detached from their ankles and remained stuck to the floor. Swarm of Flies. A swarm of flies that deals no damage, only annoyance. They used it in a tavern to create a distraction and made their own entrance into the plot area. Bluntify Weapons. A spell that creates a magical barrier on a weapon, preventing it from making contact with anything. It must be cast while holding the weapon. The players snuck into the guard's armory and cast it on all the weapons, then robbed a bank. I still threw them curveballs. For example, the spell could still cause knockback, and an NPC who kept weapons at home could still attack with them. Story 37. Players say they are sorry, but this incredibly easy and obvious puzzle cannot be solved. They also claim that this useless item can be used for genocide. Story 38. Father of a dungeon master here. During lockdown, our 24-year-old son lived at home and couldn't play with his usual crew. So we agreed to Sunday morning family Dungeons and Dragons sessions and actually quite enjoyed them. His mother played a cook who had a magic ladle that could produce any liquid. I asked if she could throw the contents. He said it would have a 5-meter range. He was expecting her to produce a healing soup, and he had to look up hydrofluoric acid when I suggested she lob that at some kobolds. Story 39. I ran an alien role-playing game session one Halloween. There was a wrench, a normal red wrench. More than anything, it was just something funny that they would check on. They asked every 10 minutes whether the wrench was still there, and it always was. They used it to adjust some piping in the oxygen recycling room, pump the section of the space station full of pure oxygen, and then proceeded to incinerate a handful of xenomorphs and my ubermorph. Don't mix pyros with real-world engineers. Story 40. Our party once encountered a dog that randomly polymorphed and we absolutely refused to part with it. We named him Shaggy. Story 41. The brooch of glamour was made by a powerful wizard as a gift for his wife. Twice per day it could make you look your best. Your body would be clean and fresh, your clothes mended and like new, your hair perfectly coiffed, and your makeup done as you prefer. It was meant to add color, and a human wizard in the party claimed it. There was talk of using it to fix and clean everyone's clothes and whether it could mend armor. It could not. but its real effect showed during a showdown with the big bad evil guy. The party wizard also wore a ring of fire resistance and carried a unique item called the Blast Scepter. The Blast Scepter was like an enhanced wand of fireballs and granted resistance to both explosive and fire damage. Combined with the ring, the wizard would take only 1/4 damage from fireballs, and on a successful saving throw she would take no damage. She also had large saving throw bonuses. Facing the big bad evil guy, who was a fire wizard, she taunted him into giving her his best shot. He launched a huge enhanced fireball. When the smoke cleared, she stood unharmed, not even a singe. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, her makeup perfect, and her clothes crisp and clean. She was effectively immune to fireballs, and the psychological effect of surviving his best attack while appearing immaculate caused the big bad evil guy to flee. Psychological warfare at its finest. Story 42. We had barrels of rum liberated from a pirate ship's hold and came upon a cellar being used as a nest by an army of huge spiders. We soaked rats in rum, made them very drunk, and turned them loose in the spider room. The rats were eaten. By that point, the giant spiders were having a wild party and going berserk. We charged in and hacked our way through without anyone dying. That was rarer than it should have been, because our party consisted mostly of fragile, squishy characters who were regularly killed by threats they should not have been. Story 43. My dungeon master allowed our thief to have an incredibly stale baguette. We used it to kill many orcs. Story 44. Obligatory. I am a player, not a dungeon master. My dungeon master once let me design my own weapon as a reward for being the only person of 7 to show up to a session. The only rule was it had to be silly and useless. I created Archibald, the world's greatest ladies' man. He was the soul of a super charismatic elf trapped in a tiny iron lantern. Basically, the flame was a little ghostly elf's head that would act as my wingman, but only when I tried to romance monsters. Dumb, borderline useless, and it led to a lot of silly role-playing opportunities. Perfect. Months later, our party fought a hydra. No one had any caustic or flame-based attacks to cauterize the necks, so the heads kept growing back. Our barbarian noticed that technically Archibald was a little flame, so bludgeoning the hydra with his lantern would count as burning damage. He proceeded to beat every head to pulp with a screaming elven smooth talker. That was peak Dungeons and Dragons. Edit. Thanks for my first Reddit gold, kind stranger. Also, this comment now has more upvotes than every other comment and post I have made in my 6-year Reddit career combined. After all these years, Archibald is still working his magic to make me more popular. Story 45. I am a player, not the dungeon master. The dungeon master let us keep a discarded clam from a fish market, which we used to trap the main antagonist's soul inside. Story 46. There was a spoon that turned things into food. I told them to turn non-living things. I did not expect them to do this. They took things of great value and turned them into food. It was just a bland mush, but it would serve as a day's ration like the berry thing. They turned armor and swords into food. If the spoon touched someone wearing them, the armor or weapons turned into a brown mash and weakened the person, turning bosses into ordinary people. It was so messed up. Story 47. Player here. Once upon a time I was playing a supernatural western game and we received a magic bullet early on that, when dropped on the ground, would point toward true north. We received this bullet in session 1 and promptly forgot it existed. We then went on a 2-year campaign tracking an evil time-traveling wizard. Antics included poisoning several rich people with ice cream, crashing a zeppelin, a player character going insane and trying to murder his way to the presidency, fighting a train monster, and finally confronting the evil wizard in a pocket dimension. We were somehow woefully underprepared to fight the bathrobe-wearing wizard because he was immune to all forms of damage. We were at a loss until the wizard shouted that he could only be hurt by magic. We paused and checked our inventories for a few minutes. Suddenly my buddy shoved his character sheet in my face and pointed out the words magic bullet. We then shot the boss in the face, killing him instantly. Our game master was reasonably upset since we were too stupid to figure out his puzzle fight and just cheesed the final boss of a 2-year campaign. But in the end, it was our most memorable climax. Edit. To answer some common questions. The system was a heavily modified Unknown Armies, 2nd edition. It is a phenomenal occult horror game that I would recommend to anyone interested in magic being dictated by the collective unconscious with lots of urban decay. For Western needs, I would go to Savage Worlds and Deadlands. Our game master let this pass because it was a fun way to end the campaign that rewarded our fast thinking. We were supposed to break some pots to dispel the pocket dimension. We did not suplex the train. I now wish we did. It seems we accidentally plagiarized the Dark Tower. Well, shit. Story 48. I don't know if it's useless, but when I played a druid years ago, I used the spell call Lightning a lot. I ended battles before they could start by acting as a lightning sniper. As a result, whether I play a magic user or not, wherever my character goes it is sunny and clear, not a cloud in the sky. It's been years and none of my characters have ever seen a cloud. Story 49. I remember reading a story about a party constantly pestering the dungeon master for an item of unlimited something until he caved in. He gave them an item that created unlimited boxes with roughly the structural integrity of thin cardboard. No merchant would pay for them, and they could not be broken down into reagents. The party still used the boxes, exploiting their weightlessness to reach high places. Story 50. During a dungeon crawl, we found a cloak of many things. It had only 3 patches, 2 of which were 20-foot holes and the last of which was a ladder. I volunteered to keep it. Later, we encountered an archmage who was supposed to escape after the encounter, and we had extraordinarily bad luck against him. I decided to throw one of the 20-foot holes at him. I rolled a natural 20. That is the story of how I defeated a 10th-level archmage when I was 4th level. For context, the dungeon master ruled that because I rolled a natural 20, the hole appeared on him, so he took massive force damage and died. Story 51. I gave them the sign from a random tavern in the middle of nowhere, which they used as the symbol to start an anarchist revolution across the continent. Story 52. Ha! Wand of Limp Dick. We had a bard, of course, who tried to sleep with anything that had a pulse and some that did not. We gave it to the cleric as a kind of off button to tone him down a bit. He then proceeded to use it on the King of Cormer, starting a succession war. The story arc was destroyed. Story 53. The belt of Giant Strength gave the wearer the strength of one guy and a single ant. They wanted a discount belt of Giant Strength and got exactly that. Its major upside was that it allowed small races to ignore the penalties for using weapons intended for medium creatures. Story 54. We were playing the Ghostbusters role-playing game. One character had the borrowing talent and also intimidation. We all laughed and the game began. At the end, the big bad opened a portal to another dimension using a ring. My friend's character walked up and, in an intimidating tone, asked to borrow the ring. I said no, but Ghostbusters has a list of possibilities with target numbers, and nearly impossible was 48. He had 11 six-sided dice, so the roll was very difficult, but he rolled 50 with all 5s and 6s and a single 4 and a single 3. That was the final encounter. He borrowed the ring and the portal closed. Story 55. I once ran a very silly one-shot involving a number of joke items. The 2 items my party grew to love were a pair of angry shoes that telepathically told their wearer how angry they were at all times, and a hat that, when left unwatched with another hat, would breed and produce hybrid baby hats. Somehow my party managed to place an angry shoe on top of the hat, so the shoe was wearing it as a hat. By a delightful technicality I allowed, the shoe closed its eyes and the corridor was flooded with a swarm of angry baby hats that killed the mimics in a tidal wave of felt brims and pure wrath. Story 56. Either a simple barrel or a seagull's corpse. The barrel was used to roll down a corridor to trigger traps in advance. One player carried a barrel through practically the whole dungeon. It is now an inside joke. The seagull's corpse was obtained during the very first session. We had only new players who were toying around with the world. It was the most random act I have ever seen. It was used during the second session, when I designed a very stereotypical crypt for a classic dungeon crawl. There was a door with a bowl and a knife in front of it. Some writing was on the door, but no one could read it. A fail-safe in case they did not immediately understand. The wizard knew the spell comprehend languages. They immediately understood they needed to fill the bowl with blood to open the door. The druid was about to take 1 hit point of damage because who cares? But the wizard stopped them, saying, "No, no, no, wait a moment. I got blood on me, just a sec." Then the wizard pulled out the seagull corpse she had taken last time. I had completely forgotten about it and just planted my head on the table. My plan had been for one of the players to offer their blood to open the door. Afterwards, they would find a room with a sarcophagus on a raised platform. As soon as they fully entered, the doors would shut and the sarcophagus would open, with whoever had offered their blood emerging as an empowered version of themselves. Apparently, the wizard immediately knew what I was going to do. She even apologized. She did not realize that derailing or cheesing bosses is very much part of the game. I thought about alternatives but decided to use the same mechanics I would have used for the players, since it seemed the funniest and most practical solution. The seagull went first in initiative and hit the druid quite badly. I think it was a critical hit, but the wizard completely annihilated it. My other ideas were to not let the mechanism work with non-humanoid blood, which I discarded because that is no fun, or to make the seagull a large gull-like abomination. I was inexperienced as a game master and not sure I could balance that on the fly, though that probably would have been the best solution. There was also a broken wall somewhere in the crypt with a small natural cave adjacent. Inside was a black dragon wormling that served as an optional boss fight. It was not part of their quest, but they decided to fight it. We still got our boss fight. Story 57. The dungeon master gave me a bag of infinite crabs. As a druid, I cast Speak with Animals and sent the crabs to locations to use as spies. It worked exactly 0 times. Story 58. My dungeon master gave us a meatball that we stole from a plate. We germinated it into a meatball bush using the druidcraft cantrip and turned it into a multinational meatball industry with self-sustaining farms. Note: for specifics, we used the druidcraft cantrip. After checking with the group, we confirmed the meatball came from an actual meatball bush and we treated it as a seed pod. Druidcraft allows you to make a seed pod open. Story 59. Dungeon Master gave us a dagger with a permanent minor illusion of a chicken wing. Over the course of the campaign, we slowly upgraded it into a spicy cheesy chicken wing that dealt 1d4 damage, plus 4 fire damage once per day, and could emit a cheesy fragrance once per day. We used it to kill several cultists and other creatures. Story 60. A friend told me they had a bag that was always full of smelling salts. If a creature had a strong sense of smell, a pinch to the face took care of it. He beat a sea serpent that was supposed to get the story back on track. Story 61. I do not know whether it is a useless item, but it was one I did not think would ever be used successfully. At the start of the campaign a couple of years ago, the party went through a series of trials to obtain an artifact. In one room, there was an illusory red dragon produced by a magical orb in the center of the chamber. The party entered, and the only character who succeeded on the wisdom save was, strangely enough, the barbarian. He then proceeded to wade through the illusion and grab the orb. This was when I was a novice dungeon master and did not know that players would take anything not bolted down. The barbarian took the orb and succeeded on the strength check required to remove it from its pedestal. I told him it had 3 charges because I at least had the sense to limit it, even if I did not think he would ever use it. The difficulty class for saving against it was decent but not very high, so I assumed it would not be very useful as the campaign progressed and enemies got tougher. Since then, 2 charges have been used, both in situations where they needed to distract enemies and sneak by. Thanks to poor rolls on my end, it worked both times. I am not sure when they will use the 3rd charge, but it will likely be when I least expect it. Story 62. I'm not a dungeon master, but our dungeon master gave my character a wand without saying what it did. I used it and was swiftly turned into a cob of corn for a minute. We all laughed and continued the session. A couple of weeks later, we were in the jungle and a few of us had to cross a river because we were being chased by a Tyrannosaurus Rex during an Eberron campaign. My wizard did not have teleportation spells yet, so our wild magic sorcerer cast fly and I used the wand. She only had to carry a cob of corn over the river instead of making strength checks to carry me. A couple of weeks after that, we were in a wizard's tower when a carpet on the floor grabbed me and began to suffocate me. With a good dexterity roll, I grabbed the wand from my bag and plop, a cob of corn fell to the ground, leaving the rug as confused as a rug can be. After that, our dungeon master put limits on the wand to keep it from becoming my scapegoat, and we all laughed out loud. Story 63. They were exploring an ancient dwarven research laboratory and found an amulet taken from a chiton that produced chain. Each day, it created 10 feet of chain in a continuous strand until it was cut. Because I am an engineer, I added a line saying that whatever size and type of chain is placed on the amulet, it will begin making that instead. They thought they could make jewelry-sized chain or heavy boat chain if needed. They returned to town, spent all their wealth to have 2 enormous gold chain links made, and set about ruining the world's economy. Story 64. My dungeon master had grabbed one of those 100-sided die random magic item trinket tables. Most of them are funny, minor things with little practical use, like a ring that glows dimly and can change color, or a cast iron pan whose handle never gets hot. We have rolled that item 3 or 4 times now. It is a running joke. I rolled a wine glass that severely poisons whatever is poured into it. A couple of sessions later, I used it to poison the current dungeon boss, a giant squid monster, by tossing it into his pool. I managed to retrieve it and life went on. Several months go by and everyone has forgotten about my wine glass. We are dealing with a druid non-player character who literally eats babies. We are gearing up to take him out, but his lair is behind a wall of force and we do not have disintegrate yet. So we make a deal with him to grab some myconids for the stew if he will give us access to his enchanted spring. Some illusion magic trickery makes normal giant mushrooms look like myconid bodies. The real myconids were actually pretty nice. He lets us in and starts making stew. Instead of just attacking him immediately, we decide to use the spring first in case killing him ruined it, and we chat a bit. I start asking questions about the spring, ask him if he has ever used it for the stew, and suggest we try it, see if we cannot make some magic stew. The dungeon master has not figured out my plot but is getting suspicious, so he has me roll persuasion. The wizard has no idea what is going on but happened to roll a natural 20 in his portents for the day, so before I say anything he pipes in that I roll a natural 20. He readily agrees that magic stew could be interesting. As soon as I say, I take out my wine glass and scoop up some water from the spring. The dungeon master and the wizard realize what is going on. The druid finishes the stew, takes a taste, starts choking, and drops dead. I had just expected the poisoned condition to make the fight easier. That character died in a fiery explosion not long after. Our fault? She dove on it to protect the party, and the wine glass was destroyed. Story 65. Not Dungeons and Dragons but the Old West Endgame Star Wars role-playing game. Grenades were a common weapon but were not useful. They did damage equal to 4 six-sided dice, but because of the stormtrooper's strength rolls plus the armor bonus, they usually only stunned or at best caused a wound. Our group never used them. The players had infiltrated an Imperial base and were trying to sneak through when they were caught by stormtroopers. A running fight through the base began, like Han and Chewbacca running around the Death Star, and no matter how many troopers they killed, more appeared. The players ran down the hall and surprised 2 troopers standing watch at a door. One player pulled a grenade, shouted "Baton Race," and handed it to a trooper. The trooper failed his perception check, ran down the hall with the grenade, and exploded after I rolled an unusually high damage check. Story 66. A fossilized piece of toast. They decided to raid a village that had been abandoned for a millennium. The tools and weapons they found were rusted through. On an old stone table were the leftovers from a breakfast left when the occupants evacuated. One of my players took a piece of toast. It was solid rock. It had been there forever. A few sessions and levels later, the group was struggling in a battle against a large cyclops. The rogue was down and the tank, a Goliath paladin, had just broken his weapon. Close to death, the rogue slid his lucky toast to the paladin, hoping he would survive the next hit. He did. On his turn, he threw the toast as hard as he could. The bard used bardic inspiration by singing "Yet Toast," and the paladin rolled a natural 20. I had him roll again to see how epic it would be. He rolled another natural 20. The player aimed the toast at the Cyclops' throat, broke its neck, and killed it. They used the bard's high charisma to con a village into making the toast their god. I was so glad when we finished that arc. That damned piece of toast. Story 67. A palm-sized mouse statue reveals where cheese may be and its type within 300 feet. Our rogue infiltrated a bandit camp to help prevent an assassination or ambush. He pocketed a wheel of blue cheese, and the rest of the party tracked the bandits using the small statue and prevented the attack. Story 68. Ring of incredible armor class invulnerability, for all the assholes picking it apart. It was meant as a gag. It gives the wearer an armor class of 1000, but turns them into a solid crystal statue when they put the ring on. They ran into a crypt overrun with skeletons. It was meant to scare them off and remind them they were not all-powerful and not ready to face what was inside. The skeletons were crawling up a well 3 feet across. One of them jumped over the well, put the ring on, plummeted several hundred feet, and killed most of the skeletons. For everyone saying armor class doesn't matter for falling damage, I hope your dungeon master breaks every item on your person the next time you take falling damage. Story 69. We had an adventure in which the characters delved into one character's dream to heal supernatural wounds. In one part of the dream, there was a guard with a ticking heart. They opened a small door in his chest, fixed his heart, and took the little door with them. Another scene involved battling a tiny version of the Pope who shot lightning from his fingers. When they killed him, he turned out to be made of potato, La Popa rather than El Popa, and a character took a sample of the Pope potato. Later, on the final island, they found a dollar store stocked solely with brass items, and a jazz fan bought a saxophone. While wandering the moors, they were set upon by a ravenous piranha moose. The jazz fan rolled a critical success on his saxophone skill and tamed the beast. In the final dungeon, they encountered a rat spirit and bribed it with the Pope potato to get information and a guide. As part of one character's traumatic childhood memory, they were attacked by a swarm of golden retriever puppies dragging them into the water. No one could bring themselves to harm the puppies, but they remembered the little door, used it to open a hatch in the ground, and pushed the puppies through. I hadn't planned the resolutions to any of these encounters, but the players used those odd, seemingly useless items to complete the adventure, and it worked better than in most video games where you suddenly need a strange item you picked up much earlier. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.